parents out there, and continues to fail. It has failed for many, many years. The COVID-19 response by Jared Polis, our governor, and failed school districts like the Poudre School District and the Denver and the Bold. All these school districts, they failed kids with the lockdowns and isolation. You've got violent crime on the increase, suicide on the increase, drugs on the increase, academics on the decline. We're rising in categories among our students that we should be falling in, and we're falling in areas that we should be rising in. And that's why I say the Colorado Public Schools have failed Colorado parents, and they're failing this morning. If your kid's in a Colorado Public School, that school is failing your kid as a whole. Not that there's not some good teachers out there, but the system is failing your kids. Your governor, Jared Polis, is failing your kids today because of how the public schools are structured. Well, a lot of folks think, like the state of Utah has just now passed a bill, and it will be signed by the governor, in which the money will follow the kids. It won't go to the schools, it will follow the kids. And there's states that are toying with these types of educational savings accounts in which money gets deposited and you use it as you wish for your kids' education. An interesting take, though, by Leigh Bortins. I want to bring Leigh into the program. Leigh is the founder and the chief visionary officer of Classical Conversations, which supports classical Christian homeschoolers in all 50 states and in 30 foreign countries. Leigh Bortins has a piece, it's at theamericanthinker.com, called The Problem with Education Savings Accounts. So with no further ado, let me bring in Leigh Bortins to the program. Leigh, welcome to the show.
Thanks so much for having me, Jimmy, and what a nice setup. You did a good synopsis there of what's been going on in the issue, so I appreciate being on your show.
Well, I appreciate you coming on. A lot of conservatives out there think that these educational savings accounts are a good thing. They think, hey, this is a wonderful thing. The money can follow the kid, not the school. You bring your counterpoint of that as a person leading a homeschool organization that maybe not so fast there. This may not be the solution that we think it is. Give your breakdown here.
Yeah, so we've been doing this for 25 years, and I've been homeschooling for 40 years. So for the last 25 years, I've been helping over 1 million families get their kids through home education in every state. So we've had to learn all the laws, and some of the states have had various savings accounts for years, and we see the detriment within them. And this is why. Funding is always the problem, right? And so what they're trying to do with ESAs and the vouchers and the tax credits is saying that we as the government we're going to take private organizations and now make them public through funding. And every single wonderful Republican says, but our law will be written in such a way that we won't hurt you guys. Well, how true has that ever been? That if the government gets their nose into the tent, eventually the whole camel doesn't follow behind. So that's one of the reasons we're against them. The other reason is that inherently you can't stop Marxism and socialism with more Marxism and socialism. So when you start giving funding to private enterprises, you inherently make them government enterprises. I own a private enterprise. We take no government funding. Please leave me alone.
Now that you mention it, I'm thinking of Hillsdale College, which has been around for a better part of a century or more, and they pride themselves on the fact that they can teach the curriculum they want. They can do what they want because they take absolutely not a penny of government grants and government dollars. And so the fear becomes, if you're a homeschool organization or a private school, that eventually this money that you will become used to, and it will become like heroin in your veins, and then later on, if not immediately, they can come in and say, hey, if you're going to take the money, you're going to have to change this curriculum. And you're like, wow, I built an entire empire off of this money, and I can't live without it. So maybe I will compromise my core values and change the curriculum.
Sure, it's really hard not to do that. I mean, look at what happened in 2008 with mortgage tax credits. Did all of us give up our tax credits so that we would have a really actual integrous monetary system? No, we just begged for more help. And so that's what ends up happening when you get the government funding things like housing and food and education. Eventually, five generations later, it's expected, and even more is expected. And those of us who for 40 years now have been trying to say, stop the madness. Parents, pay your own bills, and if you can't, ask your neighbor or your church. They will help you. But no, the easy solution is just put them on a bus and be gone rather than have the responsibility. And what's really wonderful is through COVID, we got to see that if overnight we just close the schools down, the children and the parents will find a way to live with each other, and they'll find other methods of educating. So like during COVID, I opened up a micro school, to help public school parents, and of course our homeschooling numbers increased. There's so many ways to help each other that don't require the government.
You work in all 50 states. Give me your perspective from what you know, and I'm not expecting you to know all the intricate details. But I say the Colorado public schools, like many states, are failing. Our suicide rates are up. Drugs after COVID are up. Violent crime is up in the schools and on the streets. And our academics have gone to hell in a handbasket in the public schools. From your perspective, again, 50 states you have to keep up with. Your perspective, your overview, your perspective of the Colorado public school system.
Yeah, Colorado was one of the ones early on that tried to be innovative and help the homeschoolers. And I, 20 years was crying. Ronald Reagan's worst 9 words in the English language, he said, is "We are the government and we are to help." And I kept saying, "You're going to pay for this. Don't take the help." Well, sure enough, you've got a lot of Christian ministries that were involved in the charter school movement and that loved Colorado. All their financing's declining, because they're used to depending on people they shouldn't have been depending on for their monies. So it's all carries through, right? So if the local churches and Christian parachurch organizations aren't there to support the families, well, then that's even less support for the ones that are in the public school system. So Colorado tried this a long time ago, and what you just said is still true. It does not help because it's the wrong kind of help. The government is not our savior. The Lord is. And he gives children parents to teach them, not a government institution. So it's the wrong sphere of influence from our perspective, and that's why it fails.
Leigh Bortins is my guest. She's the founder and chief visionary officer.
When people say, but it was a good school 40 years ago or 50 years ago, as a classical educator, I would say, really? Were you really reading Aristotle? Were you really learning how to debate? Were you really learning, the value of arithmetic over the value of STEM and algebra? I mean, we've got everything backwards in our educational system now, and it began in the middle of the last century when all the states became compulsory and all the states started funding. But that's one thing a lot of people don't know is that before the 1920 compulsory education years, even public school at that point, you had to pay to go. It's changed drastically, but because you only know what you know, we don't know the history of when we were successful and had high literacy rates compared to now we have low literacy rates. It's all related to funding. With the shekels come the shackles.
Leigh Bortins is my guest, the founder, chief visionary officer of Classical Conversations that support classical Christian homeschoolers in all 50 states and 30 foreign countries. Leigh, for somebody who says, well, I like these education savings accounts, the cost of living has gone up. Some single parent homes, the parents like, I have to work. I can't homeschool. This will at least give my child access to something better than the traditional public school. What do you say, or what advice do you give to that parent that maybe a single parent that homeschooling as we know it is not an option because they do have to work and they're not at home? What do you say to them? They may like this education savings account or the voucher.
So why don't we do a better job of promoting the private organizations that are sponsoring ESAs? See, everyone thinks the government has to do it. And we talk about more school choice occurring. I'm like, no, you're going to destroy the choices that are already out there. There's already scholarship organizations that will help you with your funding that are private.
How does someone find those organizations? I mean, I know some of the private schools might give a scholarship to a needy situation, but how do you find that? Because, again, I'm thinking of the cost of living in Colorado is now one of the highest, especially Denver is one of the highest in the nation. We're rivaling California in just overall inflation, and everybody's stressed and everybody's taxed, and people say, I got to get out of the public schools because they suck, but I can't. How do you find that kind of help?
Well, everybody talks about Googling things, and I would say Google. There's so many organizations, and there's going to be some that are very localized in their support, and then some that are statewide, and of course there's national organizations. But I would encourage everybody to start looking first at HSLDA to see about their benevolent fund, and then which is Homeschool Legal Defense Association. Then I would look at your local Classical Conversations community. Our local communities help folks who want help in homeschooling, both financially and in their commitment to their children's education. And then just keep typing in private scholarships. and they'll start popping up and you'll learn. But I think a better solution even to that is something that our church hasn't done. If you're in my church, we have 4 options for you that are private education. We offer a 1-day-a-week program with classical conversations. We offer a 3-day-a-week covenant prep program. We offer a 5-day-a-week Association of Classical Christian School program. And we have a scholarship if one of those aren't going to work for you. If there's 300,000 churches in the United States. If each of them just did one thing, this would be ended tomorrow.
Yeah. Leigh Bortins and her husband. Oh, go ahead.
Okay, we keep looking to the government to save us, and it never, ever will.
Leigh Bortins and her husband are homeschool parents for 4 sons in North Carolina, and they have an organization called Classical Conversations. Leigh is the chief visionary officer. I will post up the piece she has at American Thinker about education savings account, kind of counter perspective for some people that are celebrating those. Leigh, if somebody wants to find your organization, Classical Conversations, how do they connect with you?
Go to classicalconversations.com and go to our community page and put in your zip code, and somebody will contact you and see how they can serve you.
Leigh Bortins, I appreciate you hopping on the program today. Thank you very much. Good conversation. And again, her latest piece at American Thinker is quite unique. I think it's a very interesting take, maybe a little counterintuitive for some people, conservatives that are celebrating these vouchers and education savings account, but it is at least a great perspective. You know, I liken this. I remember I've talked about this before when I ran for Congress back in 2010. Everybody, the conservative, wanted me to talk about the Defense of Marriage Act and how marriage should be between a man and a woman. I said, I agree. That's what marriage is. Marriage is an institution by God. But the problem is, and the reason I think some people wasted a lot of time or spent time that could have been spent somewhere else on bills like the Defense of Marriage Act, is that the nose of the elephant is already under the tent. I mean, the camel's there. Not the elephant. The camel it's there. We've already before your time and my time, back sometime in history of our grandparents and great grandparents, somebody allowed the government to start handing out licenses to be married. And that is the moment that we surrendered, and that was the slippery slope of surrendering what was a holy God-birthed institution of marriages and letting the government decide whether you get a license and how you get the license. And that was always my problem is we surrendered that topic of marriage, sadly, to the government by allowing them to issue licenses and taxes on that, et cetera. You think George and Martha Washington in the day went and got a marriage license? No. They went to their pastor or their priest or their minister and got married. And I think that's kind of a similarity of what Leigh Bortins is talking about. If you're not careful, it may sound good right now that you get a savings account, but once you allow and start receiving government funds down the road, even if there's no stipulation on that now, you go out and build new buildings, you go out and build a fancier school, you do whatever you want to do, and suddenly those schools now have to comply. That's why Hillsdale, for years, has said they do not, will not, and shall not. They will not, shall not, and cannot, and are not going to ever take a penny of government funding. So I think it's a great point by Leigh Bortins and something to contemplate and consider. And it's the flip side of the same coin, and I'm glad to present it to you here. I'll put the American Thinker piece up here in just a moment. If you want to jump in, 866-888-5449. If you do get through on the phone lines,